Now, in this section, we talk a little bit about quoting. Quoting is important because, by default, the bash interpreter essentially parses whatever is interpreted at the prompt, and in particular, certain keywords such as the $, which is reserved for echoing variables, the backslash, and other characters, but more importantly, $ and backslash, happen to be characters that are reserved, and you need to know when to use the different types of quoting mechanisms that are available. Now, often you'll find when using bash either from the prompt in interactive mode or from a shell script in non-interactive mode that you'll have to use different types of quoting, or by simply reading someone else's script, you may see various quoting mechanisms used, and you may wonder why. Well, there are two types of quotings that are used within the bash environment. There's strong quoting, and there's normal quoting or relaxed quoting, not so strong quoting. Let's open a shell, and we'll show you an example of what we mean. Understanding it is quite simple, and you can always research the reserved commands or reserved sequences, etc., that you need to use within the right sets of quotes, depending on what you're doing, of course. Now let's try to just echo some basic text. We'll say this is a test. This is a test, contains no unusual characters, nothing reserved by the bash shell. And of course there's a full reference, as is the case with any programming language, at GNU.org. You can look up the bash reference there to see what is reserved, what isn't. But echoing normal characters works pretty fine. Even characters such as question mark, you can say, for example, is this a question? And the bash interpreter will not complain. It echoes for you the question mark. But what if you'd like to include one of the reserved keywords, such as $? Let's show you what we mean. Let's say we echoed I love money, and we indicate money with a $. What comes out? Well, with no quotes, etc., the $sign is printed. But a $sign will print. However, if a $sign is followed by any other value, any other character, then the bash interpreter thinks that what follows needs variable substitution. We'll show you what we mean. Let's echo I love money, and we'll put a value here. We'll call it this much, for this much money. Now notice the $, as well as the this much, does not get echoed. And that is because bash by default cross-referenced its set of variables in search of a variable called this much. So in other words, if you wanted to actually print the $, with the word this much, you need to actually escape the $, because if you don't escape the $, the bash interpreter thinks that it is for variable substitution or one of the reserved keywords. Now, the official escape key or escape character within the bash environment is the backslash. When you specify backslash, the very next character, or the character which follows it, is escaped and is printed literally. When it's printed literally, you see it just as it is, no fancy interpretation, such as is the case with variable substitution and interpretation. Let's show you what we mean. If you do, like, for example, echo I love money, and with the $, you specify, let's say, $50, this does not print. It prints 0. There are no values here. However, you can escape the $, with the backslash, the official escape character. And as you can see here, I love money, $50 comes out. So there are certain characters that need to be escaped, such as the reserved characters, such as $, and even a space. Let's say you want to print a space in a directory name. You tend to need to use the escape character. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's go to temp2. That's the directory we've been working in. Let's attempt to make a directory which contains spaces. We'll make a directory, we'll call it testing space directory space with space a space space. So we're going to attempt to make a directory which contains one space here, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Now look at what happens. all appears to have run properly, but all is not well. If we LSL, you'll see X number of directories were created. One for A, or for A, one for directory, one for space, one for testing, one for with. If you're confused, don't be. This is because we didn't escape the space character when creating the directory. So, by default, Bash interpreted this as a list. These are characters separated by spaces. As you've seen in previous sections, we're able to create lists and assign them to variables, and when you assign them to variables, they lose their new line characters and essentially form one line. Well, when Bash sees one line separated by spaces, it by default instructs the command to create X number of whatever, directories, files, you name it. So Bash has created 2, 3, 4, 5 directories. We need to remove those directories. You can find that make directory command, substitute it with a remove command with the RF so it doesn't prompt you. And now when you look at the directory, they're all gone. Because once again, when we remove and we specify the directory separated by a space, Bash interprets the entries or words that are separated by spaces as a list. And a list gets processed sequentially. In other words, testing is made, then directory is made, and then or with, and then then space. So how do we escape it so that we end up with one directory which contains the actual spaces using the magical escape key? We rehash the make directory command, and we escape the very next character after the G after testing, and this tells the shell escape the next character and actually preserve the space. Now right after directory, we do the same thing. Right after with, we do the same thing. And if we don't, what will happen is as follows. Let's say we stopped here. A directory would be created called testing space directory space with space That's what would be created. Then you'd have a separate directory for, or with space, you'd have two separate directories for and for space. So we need to escape all these characters. After we'll put an escape character. Now this may look funny to you, especially if you consider within a Windows environment you can create a directory with spaces, but typically within a Windows environment what you end up doing is enclosing directories within that contain spaces within quotes, or anything that needs to be preserved literally within quotes. So it's not much different. In fact, Bash has standardized on the / character as its escape character for escaping reserved characters, such as a space or a $. And those are the two that I'm focusing on because they're the two that you're most likely to see. There are certainly others. So let's make this directory. Now if we LSL, you'll see that there's a newly created directory called testing space directory space with space space space. If you need to navigate into this directory and you tab it out using tab completion, by default Bash does this for you. Bash enters all of the escape characters or the escape sequences needed, the backslashes needed, and at the end it has a / because after all this is Unix, derivative Unix, Linux, which uses the / for changing directories. Now we're actually in the directory, and what's echoed here in the prompt contains a space without the escape sequence. So you understand how to use the escape character. Now what about quoting? Well, you have strong quotes, single quotes, and you have not so strong quotes, double quotes. So once again, anything that you'll do within double quotes for the most part will be preserved with the exception of the key characters such as $. $. Looks to get interpreted as a variable, especially when it's followed by a value. In particular, when it's followed by a value. We'll show you what we mean. We'll echo within double quotes, this is a test. $. And when we echo it, it echoes. But if we put another character right after the $, then everything disappears because the Bash interpreter goes looking for a variable called 7. That makes pretty much sense. If there were really a variable called 7, it would echo, such as is the case with a variable called ? There is a variable called ? It contains the status, the exit status, which we've spoken about, the exit status, the error level. So this will echo. But in general, if you put some other unset variable, it won't echo. But what if you really wanted to preserve the $ and the value after? Then you use strong quotes. Anything within strong quotes, and strong quotes are referred to as single quotes, anything within single quotes are treated literally and echoed and preserved literally. And as you can see here, $7 print. They may be wondering, what about the escape character? What if we stuck, let's say, the escape character / in here? What would happen? It still prints. What if we put 2 backslashes? They print. Again, everything is preserved literally within single quotes. It's important for you to know because as you script, you may find peculiarities, oddities in regards to the way some of your strings are either being interpreted or echoed, and it could have to do with something as simple as the difference between single and double quotes, strong and relaxed quotes. So be careful of the quotes that you use. It isn't too complex, and the Bash guide online tells you all the characters if you do run into problems. You typically run into problems when you're using $, because $ represent variables when they're followed by a value, and spaces. Another thing for you to know is if you wanted to echo and preserve the / within double quotes, you can escape the /. So let's say we said this is a test. We'll keep the $, no value after. What if we wanted to preserve this /? What would happen? Well, we didn't escape the /, so look at what happens with the shell. It waits for us. I'll Control-C to break it. Now if we had 2 slashes, one is escaped. So in other words, if you wanted to, within double quotes, preserve the /, if you're in double quotes, not single quotes are strong quotes. If you want to preserve it within double quotes, you need to escape it twice. And if you want to print more than 1 quote, well, you need to escape it twice. Not in this case. You can't escape it 3 times because they're escaping each other. You escape it twice, you end up with 2 quotes. It should make perfect sense. If you print it once, it's no good. You print it twice, the second one escapes the first. You do it 3 times, the second escapes the first, but then you're left with the third, which is the case we had here. And that is essentially equal to having 1, which is why you need 4, or an even number, in other words. Let's say, for example, we go with 5. Same process. Let's go with 6. Then we end up with 3. So if you want to escape the / sequence within double quotes, just keep it an even number. That's a rule of thumb. And if you want to escape a variable within double quotes, well, you can't. What you need to do is use single quotes, or what appears to be a variable to the shell, like something such as $100. The shell thinks this is a variable. Well, if you use single quotes, it's not a problem. It doesn't perform any particular parsing. So what you've learned thus far is pretty simple, pretty quick, doesn't seem like much, but when you script and when you interpret other scripts, it helps. You need to understand single quotes, double quotes, and the magical / escape sequence character, because it helps you to preserve certain characters such as spaces, as you saw with creating our directory testing directory with a space. Otherwise, the shell detects everything or all of the words separated by spaces as a list. And if you apply this list to any of the loops, such as the for loops, they get processed sequentially, one at a time. However, if you escape it, then the character is preserved. Remember, a space is a legitimate character. You need to recognize that it actually is a character and needs to be escaped if you want to echo it. So you understand single quote, double quote, and the / escape key. If you want to learn all of the different reserved words that need to be escaped within double quotes, just check out the Bash reference guides, but the important ones include the $, especially when you're using it within double quotes. Within single quotes, everything is escaped. We'll be using this knowledge throughout our scripting studies, as you'll see when we develop scripts that contain $, backslashes, spaces. We'll have to alternate between single, double quotes, etc.